My wife smirked. "I'm engaged to him." "Now get out of our house," I replied. "Well, that's quite a development." She was escorted out by the police later that evening for trespassing. I'm Ethan, 38, male, and this is the story of how a single congratulations changed the trajectory of my entire life. I had thought the house I built was a home. It turned out to be just collateral in someone else's business plan. The house was not just lumber and drywall, it was 10 years of my life, a physical testament to a dream. As an architect, I poured every ounce of my creativity and late-night calculation into its design, setting it on a quiet, elevated lot overlooking the valley. I designed it to be a sanctuary, a place where the clamor of the world couldn't reach, and for a long time it was. I considered it my magnum opus, the only structure I truly cared about in a world full of fleeting projects. My success at the firm was substantial, but the house represented my soul. I was perhaps too proud, too complacent in the belief that such a foundation could never be shaken. That overconfidence, as I would soon learn, was the chink in my armor. When I met Chloe, she was 32, a vibrant project manager in commercial real estate. She was ambitious, driven, and possessed a social energy that perfectly complemented my quiet, methodical nature. I was immediately flattered by her focus and drive, mistaking her relentless pursuit of financial status for a sign of a strong, capable partner. I truly believed that her ambition would fuel our shared future. I often look back on that period with a sense of quiet pity for my former self. A man too steeped in his own success to notice the fundamental difference in our core value. Our marriage, which lasted 6 years, was characterized by an uneasy coexistence between my commitment to meaning and her obsession with material gain. For me, the home was everything. It was a legacy of craft. For Chloe, it was merely an expensive, fully paid-for asset with a high market value, a stepping stone. In fact, early in her career, I had used my extensive industry contacts to help her secure several major contracts, opening doors she could never have accessed alone. Yet she rarely, if ever, acknowledged my help, instead attributing her rapid success entirely to her own effort. I let it slide. I truly believed that love meant overlooking small acts of self-centeredness, and that these were simply minor flaws in an otherwise brilliant woman. This internal monologue, the act of continually justifying her self-centeredness, was my ultimate undoing. The first true red flag wasn't a whisper of infidelity, but a loud, clear discussion about money. Chloe often expressed disdain for my firm, a prestigious but slow-moving architecture office. "It's too slow, Ethan," she would often sigh, running a perfectly manicured hand across the marble countertop I had personally selected. "We should be talking investments, capital gains, the next big thing, not monuments." I remember sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee from the high-tech Wi-Fi-enabled machine I had bought her as a housewarming gift. I laughed it off, but her comment lingered, a faint discordant note in my peaceful symphony. Then came the push to refinance. The house had been fully and legally mine before we married, a fact I had proudly asserted, but she insisted, urging me to move the deed entirely into both our names. "The bank requires it, darling," she'd said one evening, holding a thick folder of documents. "We'll get a better rate, and besides, it's a legal necessity now that we're a unit, isn't it? It's a sign of trust." I was neck-deep in a demanding project at the firm, working long hours, and the paperwork was dense, filled with complex legal jargon. I trusted her implicitly. I signed the documents she put in front of me, barely skimming the language. I told myself it was just a smart financial move, overlooking the fact that my trusted wife was subtly restructuring the ownership of my life's work. In that stack of papers, she buried a clause that would later become critical, a clause I signed away through sheer exhaustion and complacency. I would later realize that this subtle push for joint ownership was essential to her plan. She needed to make sure that when the time came, the property would fall under the easiest possible classification of marital assets. She was not just trying to elevate her own status, she was strategically repositioning herself to capture my most valuable asset. My sanctuary was being systematically reclassified as mere collateral in a business deal I knew nothing about. I now understand that these small early betrayals, the constant undermining, the subtle financial manipulations, were the necessary groundwork. They were designed to soften my resistance and dull my critical judgment. The house remained beautiful, the sanctuary intact, but the woman I shared it with had already started seeing it through the lens of a balance sheet. The architect, who prided himself on seeing the big picture, was completely blind to the malicious blueprint unfolding right under his own roof. The true awakening hit me not like a sudden explosion, but like the slow, cold seeping of water into the structure's foundation. It began ironically with an innocuous phone call. A former colleague who had moved into the commercial development sector called me one Tuesday afternoon. He was congratulating me, or so I thought. "Heard the good news, Ethan?" he asked, his voice laced with the kind of industry insider excitement I used to share. "That massive new coastal project in the next county, impressive that Chloe and Darren Vance got the lead. Big money, man. The name Darren was an unfamiliar and deeply jarring piece in the puzzle. I paused the pen in my hand, freezing above a set of structural blueprints. I managed a weak laugh, pretending I was in the loop. Chloe and who? Oh, Darren. I stammered, pulling the name from the recesses of my memory, connecting it to a business card she had once vaguely referenced. I ended the call quickly, my mind racing. At that moment, I did not care about the infidelity. The word that echoed in my head was coastal project. I walked stiff-legged to my home office and immediately opened the public planning database. I navigated to the coastal region he'd mentioned and pulled up the maps. As I overlaid the proposed commercial blueprints for Chloe's new venture, the truth cold, hard, and architectural settled in my gut. Chloe's project and the associated infrastructure plans for the surrounding development depended strategically on a critical piece of land, the very land our house occupied. It was the crucial access point for a utility corridor and a non-negotiable factor in the overall development's mandated aesthetic. My house, my carefully crafted sanctuary, was not an asset to Chloe. It was a roadblock, or worse, a strategically valuable piece of collateral to be acquired. The infidelity wasn't the goal. It was the means to the goal. It was a distraction, a tool designed to provoke an emotional, reckless reaction from me that would hasten the divorce, allowing her and Darren to swoop in and claim the property easily as a swiftly settled marital asset. The wave of searing emotional pain was quickly replaced by a dangerous, absolute calm. The shock of betrayal now hardened into the clarity of strategic thinking. I realized that if I reacted with anger, I would only be playing directly into her meticulously planned hand. Chloe was expecting a volcanic eruption of rage followed by a hasty, compromised legal surrender. I would give her neither. I would give her the illusion of defeat while secretly preparing for a counterattack based on facts and law, not passion. That evening, the moment of the last straw came while we were in the kitchen preparing dinner. We stood near the high-tech coffee machine which was already silently gathering evidence against its owner. Chloe was smiling, a self-satisfied, almost pitying smile. "Ethan," she started, turning from the stove, "I have some news, something I should have told you earlier." She paused, relishing the dramatic silence. I maintained an expression of detached curiosity. She took a breath, the arrogance thick in her voice. "I'm engaged to someone else, Ethan. We've been seeing each other for months. Congratulations to us." There it was, the moment that was supposed to shatter me. For a fleeting second, the old Ethan, the one who believed in love, wanted to scream, to ask why after all these years. But the new Ethan, the one who now saw the cynical blueprint of her deception, simply inhaled deeply and maintained that terrifying composure. I even managed a slight, thin smile. I looked directly into her eyes where I saw only an empty triumph, and I said with a quiet, unshakable finality, "Congratulations to you both. That's quite the development." I placed the plate of food I was carrying gently down on the counter. "I think it's time for you to pack a small bag, Chloe. Essentials only. Tonight." The look of utter confusion on her face was almost satisfying. She had expected tears, anger, pleas, anything but this unnerving composure. She had failed to provoke the emotional surrender she needed. Her script had been torn up. My uncharacteristic calm signaled a change in the game, though she had no idea just how complex the rules were about to become. Chloe's immediate shift from arrogant triumph to calculating defiance was precisely the indicator I needed. "What are you talking about, Ethan? You can't just kick me out," she insisted, her voice tight with a rising panic she couldn't completely mask. "This is my house too. We refinanced, remember? You'll regret this emotional outburst." I offered her a look of complete disinterest. "It's not an outburst, Chloe. It's an executive decision, and the house is not up for debate. Please limit your packing to a single suitcase. Your continued presence is an interference with a new legal arrangement." I then retreated to my office and initiated the quiet activation. I didn't waste a single moment on remorse or self-pity. My mind was already in architect mode, working on the most complex legal blueprint of my career. I immediately called the one person I knew could navigate the legal landscape without the emotional baggage of a typical divorce lawyer, Michael Vance. Ironically, Michael was a respected figure at Chloe's own corporate firm, a chief counsel specializing in property law. He was also a man who valued integrity over avarice, and I suspected he was already quietly aware of Chloe's questionable dealing. He was the contact recommended by my old friend, a subtle but critical lifeline. Michael was direct and concise, his voice a steady anchor in my rising sea of maneuvers. "Ethan, your refinance agreement is tricky, but you signed a specific clause about preserving the long-term value of the property. It's a loophole, but it's legally sound. You'll need to move fast. You need to establish the property as non-marital, non-divisible collateral, and you need to do it before she files that divorce petition, which she will do first thing tomorrow morning." I quickly explained my idea, an intricate blend of legal maneuvering and personal value. The house was my original work, my passion, my legacy. Could I legally detach it from the marital estate by dedicating it to a higher purpose? Michael paused for a long moment, considering the legal architecture of my proposal. "Yes," he finally confirmed. We can activate a trust, a real estate trust foundation. It shifts the asset's use from personal residence to nonprofit headquarters immediately. It's complicated, but it's sound and perfectly legal thanks to the language in your original deed. This was the core of my plan. I wouldn't fight Chloe for the house. I would give it away to a foundation I controlled, dedicated to promoting young architects. The paperwork was frantic complex and required hours of single-minded focus. I spent the next 4 hours digitally signing the creation of the Miller Architecture Foundation and dedicating the home as its permanent headquarters. By the time I was done, the property's legal classification had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a marital asset. It was a charitable asset immediately protected from the coming storm. My next move was deploying the silent weapon. I walked into the kitchen and accessed the back end of Chloe's cherished high-end coffee machine. It wasn't the appliance itself, but its built-in Wi-Fi storage features, which I, as a tech-savvy architect, had quietly adapted years ago. I was not looking for romantic confessions. I was looking for business strategy. I extracted hours of audio recordings, Chloe and Darren sipping their morning coffee discussing their real estate project, their need to acquire my property quickly, and how the emotional idiot myself would just fold. The recordings weren't about adultery. They were about organized financial fraud and manipulation, a far more potent legal weapon. At exactly 10 o'clock that night, I had my evidence and my legal structure in place. Chloe was still pacing and yelling on her phone in the living room, threatening to call her lawyer, blissfully unaware that her lawyer's ethical colleague was actively assisting me. I walked up to her holding a document and a small portable speaker. I called the authorities. Chloe, they'll be here in 5 minutes to escort you off the property. You are trespassing on the headquarters of the Miller Architecture Foundation. She looked at me in stunned fury, her voice trembling with a disbelief that her calculated scheme had so quickly backfired. You can't do this, you pathetic little man. I'll have you ruined. I handed her the trust deed, read the fine print. Chloe, you signed the clause that allowed this yourself. And here's a preview of the evidence I'll be submitting to your real estate board, demonstrating your pattern of financial malfeasance. I pressed play on the speaker. The sound of her own voice coolly discussing her intent to ruin me for a real estate deal filled the room. The arrival of the 2 uniformed officers at the front door was a chilling punctuation mark on her sudden absolute silence. The immediate aftermath of Chloe's departure was a scene of controlled chaos. The officers, satisfied that the matter was a civil dispute over property rights and not domestic violence, departed after verifying the new trust deed. I immediately called a locksmith to change every exterior lock and security code. The silence that settled over the house afterward was sudden, profound, and restorative. It was the quiet of a siege lifted. Chloe, however, was not finished. Her reaction shifted instantly from victimhood to furious calculation. She had already filed for divorce, and her first maneuver was exactly what I had anticipated, an attempt to reclaim her footing through intimidation. The real confrontation, however, came that evening, delivered right to my custom-made oak front door. As predicted, her new fiancé, Darren Vance, arrived. He was a man with a tailored suit and an air of aggressive self-importance. Assuming he was walking into a simple marital spat, he could easily bully his way through. He pounded on the door. When I opened it, I saw not a man in love, but a man protecting a business venture. The look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated territorial anger. Ethan Miller, he sneered, his voice loud enough to carry across the quiet street. I understand you're holding Chloe's belongings. You need to let her back in immediately. This is domestic harassment, and I will have my lawyers on you by morning, demanding immediate temporary access. I did not raise my voice, allowing his aggression to simply dissipate in the night air. I took a steadying breath, reminding myself that the goal was not to win an argument, but to expose the rot underneath. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice calm and low, you misunderstand the situation entirely. This property is now the legal headquarters of the Miller Architecture Foundation. I am the acting chief administrator. You are currently trespassing on foundation property, and your persistent attempts to gain access are being logged. Darren laughed, a sharp, disbelieving, almost theatrical sound. A foundation? What in God's name are you talking about? This is a petty stunt, Miller. A marital spat. You think a bogus charity filing is going to trump a 6-year marriage and a valid divorce petition? I held up the legal deed, freshly stamped and sealed. The official look of the document, even in the dim porch light, carried weight. Did Chloe tell you that this address is no longer listed under private ownership, but as the headquarters for the Miller Architecture Foundation? Or that your constant calls and attempts to gain access are now recorded as interference with a charitable organization's operation? Darren's face drained of color. He looked momentarily lost, the sudden insertion of a complex legal obstacle clearly not part of his calculated plan. He quickly recovered, his anger morphing into outright panic. This is insane. You've lost your mind. Chloe told me you'd pull a desperate stunt, but this is ridiculous. Just then, Chloe sped up the driveway in a rental car, having been alerted by Darren's frantic tone over the phone. She jumped out, her expression a mask of fury and desperation. "Oh, you idiot! she screamed, running up the steps entirely forgetting my presence. "You were supposed to wait for the order? Why are you here? You've jeopardized everything. Don't you understand what this means for the easement?" I watched them, a profound sense of detachment settling over me. They were not two people in love. They were two co-conspirators tearing each other apart over a failed scheme. The revelation of the easement confirmed my every suspicion the house was purely a strategic acquisition. "Actually, Chloe," I interjected quietly, holding up my phone, "Darren's presence and your subsequent admission of a plan to exploit the property is precisely what I needed. Your attorney will be getting the full audio package and a copy of the new trust deed in the morning. This house and the foundation it represents is no longer for sale." I then stepped back, pulled the heavy oak door shut with a deliberate finality, and turned the heavy lock. I walked away, leaving them standing on the pavement yelling at each other, and more significantly, yelling at the closed door in the cold night air. The emotional climax wasn't a shouting match. It was the decisive, quiet click of the deadbolt symbolizing the complete and final closure of that destructive chapter of my life. With the door firmly shut, Chloe, driven by a desperate arrogance, chose to escalate rather than retreat. Her official divorce filing arrived shortly after, and it was an aggressively calculated document. It wasn't just a simple petition. It was a lawsuit demanding 75% of my assets, citing emotional distress and abandonment during her alleged mental health crisis caused by my erratic behavior. She sought a restraining order and substantial interim spousal support, brazenly attempting to weaponize the narrative of the heartbroken, victimized wife. This aggressive move was precisely the tactical blunder I had anticipated. She believed that because I had maintained my composure and not publicly disputed the affair, she could seize control of the legal narrative. She was banking on a quick, emotional settlement. My legal team, spearheaded by Michael Vance, the expert in property law, responded not with an emotional defense, but with an immediate, targeted countersuit. We did not deny the divorce. We simply bypassed the emotional drama entirely and focused on the organized financial scheme. The key moment came during the initial deposition. Chloe arrived looking deliberately distressed, dressed immaculately, but radiating a feigned vulnerability. Her attorney, a man named Mr. Harrington, was leading her through the narrative of the abandoned and emotionally scarred wife. Then Michael, with his practiced dry wit, intervened. "Objection, Your Honor. We believe the petitioner's emotional distress is secondary to a more pressing matter, financial malfeasance and organized fraud. We would like to introduce Exhibit B, an audio file detailing the petitioner's plan to misappropriate the respondent's assets for a commercial real estate venture dating back months." He then played the clear, crisp recording from the coffee machine. It was stunningly clinical. Chloe's voice, calm and detached, was heard advising Darren on how I would react. "He's too much of a sentimental idiot to sell it. We'll push the emotional button, get the quick divorce, and then the house will just be a $500,000 marital asset to split." Darren's voice replied, "It's the access point for the utility corridor, Chloe. We need that land for the easement." The room fell silent. It was not a recording of whispered sweet nothings. It was the cold, hard blueprint of a calculated financial ambush. The evidence was devastating because it proved that the infidelity was merely a symptom of a deeper, more profound betrayal, a premeditated scheme to steal my life's work. My silent weapon had struck at the very core of their motive. Chloe's lawyer, Mr. Harrington, a seasoned professional who clearly valued his reputation, immediately asked for a recess. He spoke to Chloe in hushed, furious tones, his body language clearly communicating his immense frustration at being kept in the dark about the true nature of her plan. When the session resumed, Chloe's entire posture had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered look. The restraining order and the request for interim spousal support were immediately denied. The judge, clearly irritated by the misuse of the court's time for what was exposed as attempted fraud, ordered the case to be bifurcated. The divorce would proceed, but the financial matters would be handled as a case of marital misconduct, subject to a deeper forensic investigation. Michael leaned over to me and whispered, "We're not fighting a divorce, Ethan. We're fighting a criminal enterprise. Her move for 75% has just secured us 100% of the moral and legal high ground." The first legal counterpunch had landed. Chloe's aggressive lawsuit had only provided me with the formal public opportunity to introduce the evidence of her calculated treachery. She had played a stupid game, and the intellectual and legal prize was swiftly being claimed. She had only hastened the exposure of her true character. With the initial legal maneuvers failing spectacularly, and the fraud evidence now formally submitted, the immense pressure began to break the co-conspirator. The legal focus had shifted irrevocably from a simple division of marital assets to a serious investigation into organized financial deception, and the sudden lack of control caused immediate fractures in Chloe and Darren's so-called relationship. The first sign of the unraveling was purely professional striking at the very core of their shared ambition. My attorney, Michael Vance, using the court-ordered document discovery, made sure the relevant audio files and the details of my countersuit were immediately submitted to the Ethics Committee of the Regional Real Estate Board, and more pointedly, to the board of directors at the corporate firm where both Chloe and Darren were employed. The firm, a public entity highly sensitive to reputational risk and stock value, acted with ruthless efficiency. A terse internal memo, which Michael's contacts ensured I received, announced that both Chloe Vance and Darren Vance were placed on indefinite administrative leave pending the outcome of the legal review concerning their professional conduct and potential conflicts of interest. Their shared source of income, their professional standing, and their ability to execute their multi-million-dollar coastal real estate scheme vanished overnight. For them, this was not just a loss of income. It was a loss of the status and power they valued more than anything else. I heard about the immediate aftermath from a sympathetic former colleague of Chloe. Apparently, the fallout was volcanic. They were forced to share a small, overpriced, short-term rental apartment, and the arguments were continuous, brutal, and entirely focused on blame. I was told that the fighting was not about love or fidelity, but purely about who was responsible for the strategic failure. In one particularly furious text exchange, which Chloe's lawyer later reluctantly revealed during the compulsory document exchange Chloe had written to Darren, "You were supposed to check the house's original deeds. You were the real estate expert. You told me that trust foundation idea was nonsense. You told me he was too much of a fool to use it." Darren's reply was equally vicious, exposing the hollow core of their partnership. "I trusted you to provoke the right emotional meltdown. If you hadn't gone for that insane 75% claim, he would have settled and we would have had the land. Your arrogance ruined us, Chloe." They were two profoundly selfish people being forced to rely entirely on each other, without the buffer of shared success or genuine affection. Their shared dream, the very thing that bound them, was predicated entirely on my emotional failure. And once I maintained my composure, their foundation crumbled, causing them to turn on each other with brutal, self-defeating efficiency. Their efforts to involve their mutual friends and family were equally disastrous. Chloe's own mother, a kind, gentle woman who had always been slightly uneasy with her daughter's relentless ambition, called me directly. She didn't offer excuses. Instead, she offered a quiet, profound apology. "She confuses ambition with avarice, Ethan," she said softly. "I am so sorry for what she has done to your beautiful home. It seems she needed this boundary." This small moment of external validation, of understanding from her own family, was more gratifying than any legal victory. It confirmed that the truth was prevailing in the court of public opinion too. I had done almost nothing during this stage except submit the facts and what. I was not spending energy on revenge. I was simply standing aside and allowing the momentum of their own calculated malice to carry them towards their own well-deserved self-inflicted destruction. The escalating consequences were entirely their own doing. They were, with every panicked, blaming accusation, simply proving the core of my case, that their relationship was built on a conspiracy of greed, not love. Understood. I will continue the script, writing Chapter 7 with the required length, tone, and focus on the final legal and financial consequences for Chloe. Chapter 7, the final financial blow. The ultimate confrontation took place not in a sensational courtroom drama, but in the quiet, methodical environment of a final mediation hearing, mandated by the judge. By this point, the weight of the evidence had become suffocating. The forensic accountants authorized by the court had completed their review, and the findings were damning. The audio evidence from the coffee machine, supported by the paper trail of their failed land deals, clearly demonstrated Chloe's intent to defraud the marital estate and potentially engage in market manipulation through the acquisition of my property. The narrative was no longer one of divorce, but one of systemic financial abuse. Chloe arrived at the hearing, looking exhausted. The last vestiges of her polished presentation frayed. The tailored suit was crumpled, and her expression was a mask of cold fear. Darren was noticeably absent, having chosen to distance himself entirely from the financial fallout of her action, proving the transactional nature of their bond. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, but the outcome was almost inevitable given the mountain of proof against her. Chloe threw her defeated-looking lawyer. Mr. Harrington made one last, desperate, pathetic plea for an allowance, arguing that she was now unemployed and had absolutely no source of income. "She has no savings, Your Honor," Harrington stated weakly, avoiding eye contact with me. "She is practically destitute and facing extreme hardship." My attorney, Michael Vance, rose and addressed the mediator with cold, clinical precision, embodying the principle that law must serve justice. "The evidence clearly shows that the petitioner's current unfortunate state is the direct, predictable result of her own documented scheme to unlawfully seize her husband's largest asset. Her attempt to gain a 75% claim on property she had strategically sought to misclassify now warrants the maximum punitive application of the law. Hardship caused by fraud is not a mitigating factor. It is the consequence of her choices. I was then asked to make a final statement. I did not focus on my pain. I focused on my purpose. I looked directly at Chloe, who finally raised her eyes to meet mine. There was no rage in my heart, only the quiet certainty of a man asserting his boundary. But I wish no further harm upon Chloe, I said, my voice steady. I only wish to ensure that the court's judgment is one of firm, absolute boundaries, establishing that marriage is not an instrument of financial aggression. The house, my work, the life I built, none of it was collateral for her business plan. I ask the court to ensure that this judgment is not one of revenge, but one of accountability. The mediator, a woman with decades of experience, issued the final ruling with palpable authority. The financial aspects were settled entirely in my favor. Not only was Chloe denied any claim to the house, which remained the headquarters of the foundation, but she was also deemed responsible for the substantial legal costs and fees I had incurred, fighting her frivolous and manipulative lawsuit. Furthermore, her actions were formally flagged on a permanent record that would preclude her from returning to any position of financial trust or management in the real estate sector. The effect was complete and absolute. Chloe was now legally obligated to pay a massive amount to the man she had called the emotional idiot, having lost her job, her fiancé, and her professional reputation. As she signed the documents, her hand shook visibly. I watched her not with satisfaction, but with a profound sense of closure. I hadn't destroyed her. She had destroyed herself through the sheer weight of her own avarice and arrogance. Before leaving the mediation room, I delivered a final private statement to her, my voice low and composed. It was the last thing I would ever say to her. I wish you both luck in your future endeavors, Chloe. I'm sure you will be very successful working for one another. You've earned exactly what you deserve. It was the quiet final click of the legal door, confirming that her old life built on manipulation was now officially and irreversibly closed. 2 years have passed since the final judgment. The chaotic noise of the divorce, the depositions, and the emotional turmoil has faded, replaced by a deep and abiding sense of peace. The quiet certainty of having done the right thing, not just legally, but morally, has been the most profound reward. The home, my beloved architectural masterpiece, stands exactly where it was, but its purpose is now fundamentally different. It is no longer just my house. It is the active, thriving headquarters of the Miller Architecture Foundation. The foundation is the unexpected, beautiful legacy born from betrayal. We mentor young, aspiring architects, providing pro bono workspace and scholarships to those who value craft over commerce. The house is now filled with the energy of creative young minds, a sound that is infinitely more rewarding than the hollow ambition of my ex-wife. I have returned to my work with a renewed passion, using my expertise not just to design buildings, but to design better lives for others, offering a foundation of stability I myself temporarily lost. This piece is the ultimate form of winning. I am often found in the kitchen, not agonizing over betrayal, but planning the foundation's next seminar. I still use the high-tech coffee machine. I kept it as a quiet, ironic reminder. It represents the quiet, subtle power of observation over reaction. It is a trophy of awareness, not revenge. It reminds me that the most dangerous plots often unfold right in front of you, hidden behind the mundane routine of a shared life. Chloe's life, as I occasionally hear from industry whispers, has indeed become an ironic reflection of her unchecked ambition. Darren left her within 6 months of the financial ruling, claiming she was a liability after they lost their jobs and their project collapsed. Chloe, unable to secure any work in the real estate sector due to the permanent flags on her professional record, now works 2 low-paying administrative jobs in a distant part of the city. She lost her ambition, and more tragically, her sense of self-worth built entirely on material success. The quiet suffering of a life built on lies finally catching up to her is a far more effective punishment than any I could have devised. I sometimes pause in the library, a room that now serves as the foundation's quiet reading area. I reflect on the moment I said, "Congratulations to you both." It wasn't a moment of weakness, but a moment of absolute unwavering strength. I didn't fight her on her terms, anger, emotion, spite. I fought her on mine logic, law, and financial integrity. I realized that I didn't need to create the consequence. I just needed to let the truth be exposed. One afternoon, Michael Vance came by to review the foundation's paperwork. As he stood in the kitchen sipping a cup of coffee, he offered a warm, knowing expression. He glanced around the room, which was now filled with architectural models and young faces. "You know, Ethan, the original plan was just to protect the asset," he observed, his voice low. I smiled, looking out the large window I had designed years ago. "It did more than that, Michael. It forced me to define what my foundation truly was. It wasn't the wood or the stone, but the purpose I gave." He nodded, understanding my deeper meaning. "You found your foundation, Ethan, a real one this time." His words confirmed the profound, lasting lesson of the whole ordeal. The true path to peace is not in seeking revenge, but in regaining control and dedicating one's life to a purpose greater than one's own pain. This story, the tale of Ethan and his meticulously crafted home, offers us a quiet but profound lesson on the true nature of betrayal and the enduring strength found in composure. The central takeaway is not the revenge itself, but the stark contrast between wisdom and arrogance. Chloe's downfall was not a result of explosive anger or violence, but of her own unchecked hubris. She assumed that a man of sentiment, a man who built things, must be an emotional idiot. This arrogance led her to rely on a transparently cruel scheme, failing entirely to anticipate that Ethan would respond not with raw emotion, but with the cold, precise language of the law and finance. He let her actions, her own recorded words, speak for themselves, using her greed as the very tool for her undoing. Ethan showed us that true satisfaction comes from seeing karma, the natural consequence of one's actions, come full circle. This brings us to a crucial point of reflection and empathy. The moment you realize that the person you cherish sees you only as a means to an end is agonizing, touching on the fundamental sense of injustice. However, Ethan's story reminds us that true strength lies in setting clear, unshakable boundaries. He didn't seek to destroy her out of spite. He sought to protect his legacy and his peace. He showed us that the most powerful act is often the quietest, choosing to safeguard your values and the work of your life, rather than descending into a cycle of mutual recrimination. So I leave you with this question for reflection and shared wisdom. What is the most precious foundation we build and should protect: financial wealth or the unshakable foundation of moral and intellectual integrity? Please share your wisdom and your story in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to this complex chapter of life. If these stories of human complexity and enduring wisdom resonate with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your own insights. Together, we can continue to learn and grow from the profound lessons that life has to offer.